back to Empowered National Interdisciplinary Research Program 2026. I hope you all are doing well. My name is Reena Zaid Usmani and I'll be your mentor for today's lecture. Let's first take a moment to recap what we learned in our previous lecture. Last week, we discussed the acknowledgements, methods, and materials section of a research paper. We learned how to acknowledge those who supported your research and how to describe the process you followed to conduct your study, and how to explain the tools or materials you use, such as your survey questionnaires. At this point in the research process, you have already designed your survey, collected responses, and start organizing your data. But now comes one of the biggest questions every researcher has to answer, and which is how do we know whether the pattern we observe in our data are actually meaningful or whether they just happen by chance? Okay. Before we begin, let's quickly mark today's attendance. Please pause this video and comment your full name, grade or year of study, and country of residence below. Once you have done that, you can continue watching the video. Okay, first, data analysis. So let's get into it. Analyzing your data. We are going to go in order. First, how to summarize your data with numbers, then how to visualize it, and finally, how to test whether your results actually mean something or not. Okay, so about the calculator, before we start, a quick resource. If you don't own a graphic calculator, you don't need to buy one. This site, which is TI84calculator.com, is a free online calculator simulator that works right in your browsers. We are going to use calculator functions a lot later in this presentation, especially for the hypothesis testing, so keep this tab open. Okay, measures of center. Let's start with the basic measures of center. When the first receive a data set, our immediate goal is to find its center or typical value. There are three main ways to do this: median, mean, and mode. First, we discuss the median. The median is quite literally the middle of your data. It should split your data exactly into half. To find it, order all your data points from least to the greatest and select the number in the middle. For example, with the data 1 through 11, the middle number is 6. But if you even have an even number of data points, let's say 1 through 10, there's no single middle number. So you take the midpoint between the two middle values. Like there's between 5 and 6 numbers you will choose through 1 to 10. So the median is 5.5. Okay, if we talk median in our Google Sheets, doing this by hand for a big dataset will take forever. So in Google Sheets, just type is equals to median, all in capitals, into an empty cell and select the column you want. For example, is equal median h colon h. Now mean. The mean is the classic average. You calculate it by adding all your values together and dividing the total number count. Now n, where n is your sample size or how many data points you have. Using our sample data sets of 1 through 11, add them all up, divide by 11 and you get a mean of 6. And mean on Google Sheets. In the sheet, type is equal average, all in capital, into a separate cell and highlight the column you want, like is equal average h colon h, and it will spit out the average for you. For mode, the mode is simply the number you see the most often in your data. Honest disclaimer, you are probably almost never going to use this one compared to median and mean, but it's still good to know. For example, in the data set, the number 6 repeats more than anything else. So 6 is the mode. Simple as that. And mode on Google Sheets. The mode is simply the number you see the most often in your data. Just like before, in Sheets, you can type is equal mode all in capital into a cell, select your column and it will return the most frequent value for you. Now what is measure of variability? Knowing the center isn't enough, we also need to know how spread our data is. That is called variability, and we will look at range and standard deviation for that. First, range. Range is basically the most basic measure of variability there is. It is simple the distance between your highest and the lowest value. Your maximum minus your minimum. If your data goes from 1 to 11, your range is 10. Simple as that. And what about our standard deviation? Imagine two classrooms, both have an average test score of 80. In the first classroom, almost everyone scored between 78 and 82. In the second classroom, some students scored 40 while others scored 100. Even though both classes have the same average, the second class has much more variation. Standard deviation measures exactly that spread. Standard deviation tells us the average distance between a point and the mean. The formula looks intimidating. It's the square root of the sum of each data point minus the mean squared divided by n. But conceptually, all it's doing is first finding for each point is from the mean, second squaring the distance so negative don't cancel positive, and the third averaging all those squared distance, and fourth taking the square root to bring it back to the original units. Using our dataset where the mean is 6, when you do this for every point and runs the number, you get a standard deviation of about 3.16. A low standard deviation means your data is tightly clustered around the average. A high standard deviation means it's widely spread out. And on Google Sheets, thankfully we don't have to do anything maths by hands. In sheet, just type is equals to STDEV, which is short form for standard deviation, and select your column. For example, is equals to STDEV H colon H, and it calculates the standard deviation for you instantly. The normal distribution. Standard deviation becomes really powerful once you understand the normal distribution, that Gauss's bell curve. There is a rule called the 68 95 99.7 rule. About 68% of your data falls within one standard deviation of the mean. 95% falls within the two standard deviation, and 99.7% falls within three standard deviation. This is hugely useful for understanding how typical or unusual a specific data point really is. Graph for qualitative data. Numbers are great, but data is much easier to understand when you visualize it. Let's start with qualitative data, categorical data like colors, gender, or locations. Percentages. When you want to show percentages or part of a whole, pie graphs are a solid option, like this chart showing ice cream sales by flavor. Another option is a Pareto chart, which combines bars showing frequency with a line showing cumulative percentages. It's especially useful for spotting which categories are responsible for the majority of your results, like in quality control or data or defect analysis. Now, one thing you need to remember, never use 3D pie charts. They distort what calls the area principle, which makes it much harder for your view to accurately judge the actual proportions. Stick to flat 2D pie chart every single time. Now about the counts. When you're dealing with a raw count instead of percentages, bar graphs are much more precise for comparing categories side by side, like comparing favorite fruits across a group of people. A dot plot is another option where each dot represents one observation stacked up by category. Useful when you want to see the actual distribution of counts across categories or time, like visitors by hours of the day. Now, mosaic plots. A mosaic plot is a bit more advanced but really powerful. It visualizes both the count and the density, like percentage, proportions, or frequency, at the same time using rectangles or varying width and height. For example, this chart of Titanic survivors shows you both how many people were in each class and what proportions were children, women, or men, all in a single visual. Now, histograms. Now let's switch to quantitative data, numerical values like age, height, or test scores. Histograms look like a bar graph, but they are used to show the distribution and shape of the continuous numerical data, where data points are placed into buckets or intervals. If you see a gap in a histogram, that's considered an unusual feature, and you might be looking at an outlier. Regression lines. Now, if we want to see the relation between two different quantitative variables like hours of cardio per week and how long someone lived, that's where scatter plots and regression lines comes in. Regression lines on Google Sheets. To build this in Google Sheets, highlight both columns of data, right click and select chart from the insert menu. Sheet is going to default to a line chart, which is not what we want. It won't give you the relationship you are looking for. Go to the chart type drop down and change it to the scatter. This gives you the actual scatter plot with each dot represents one data point. From there, just double click the title and rename it to something descriptive like relationships between years of living and cardio. Next, go to Customize tab, scroll down to Series and check the box for trending. You can choose from several regression lines, linear, exponential, polynomial, logarithmic, but for most of what we do, we will stick to the linear. Then scroll down to the label, drop down and select Use Equation and check Show capital R square. This will display the line's equation and R square value directly on your chart. Now last step, just label your axis with proper units so anyone reads your graph understands what they are looking at. And that's it. You have built the full regression analysis straight in Google Sheets. Now, what is small r? Correlation coefficient. Now let's talk about what the equation actually tells us. And it ranges from -1 to 1. Here's how to interrupt its strength. 0.01 to 0.20 is very weak. 0.21 to 0.40 is weak and 0.41 to 0.60 is moderate. 0.60 to 0.80 is strong and zero point 0.8 to 0.99 is very strong. You can get R by taking the square root of your capital R value. For example, if your capital R value is 0.163, the square root is about 0.404, or even easier, just type is equals to Pearson all in capital in sheets and highlight your two columns to get your R directly. Now if we talk about the R square, which is coefficient of determination. R square tells you how much the variation in your data regression lines actually counts for. If our R square value is 0.163, we can express that as 16.3%, meaning our regression lines only explain 16.3% of the variation in the sample. The rest is explained by other factors we haven't measured. Residuals. A residual is the distance between your observed point and the value your regression lines predicted, calculated at observed y minus predicted y. Using this equation, we found you can calculate this for every single data point and then plot all of these residuals into their own graph. called a residual plot. Here's why residual plots matter. A good residual plot should look like a random scattered cloud of points with no pattern, evenly spread above and below zero. If you see a clear pattern, a curve, or a funnel shape like in this example, there's a sign your linear mode isn't actually the best fit for your data and your residual plot is telling you something is off. Now, hypothesis testing. Now we get the final and most crucial step in your data analysis. Hypothesis testing. This is how we determine if our research findings are statistically significant or whether they are just happened by a random chance. Now, in every hypothesis test, we set up the two competing claims. The null hypothesis written H naught is the expected outcome, the usual state of things, the assumption that nothing has changed. And the alternative hypothesis written as A slash H slash A is what we actually trying to prove that there is a significant change or effect. For example, if a pharmaceutical company is testing a new antidepressant, the null hypothesis would be the drug has no effect on depression. And if we talk about the other one, alternative hypothesis would be the drug does have an effect on the depression. So there is a null hypothesis and there is an alternative hypothesis. What is alpha and p value? So how do we actually decide what hypothesis to keep? We rely on two numbers, alpha and the p-value. Our level of significance is the threshold we set ourselves. Typically 0.05, the p-value is calculated for us by our calculator or software and it tells us how likely is that we would see results this extreme if the null hypothesis were exactly true. We compare the p-value to alpha to make our decisions. Let's walk through a real example. A pharmaceutical company claims that 80% of people lose weight from their new drug. A separate company tests on 500 randomly selected people and 388 of them report losing weight. Is there enough evidence that less than 80% of people actually lose weight from the drug? First, we check our conditions. Random sampling check. Independence, our sample of 500 is way less than 10% of the population. So check large enough sample, both NP and NQ, which come out to 388 and 112 are well above 10. So check. Next, we set up our hypothesis. Our null is that the true proportions equal 0.80. Our alternative is that the true proportion is less than 0.80 since we are asking if fewer people lose weight than claimed. We set alpha as 0.05. Now run the test and honestly, please use a calculator for this part. On a TI calculator, you would go to state the then test, then first of the test, you would plug in P naught as 0.80, X as 388 and N as 500 and select less than P naught. Running this gives us a z-score of negative 1.341 and a p-value of 0.0899. And finally, the results. We interpret our p-value 0.0899 is greater than our alpha of 0.05 value. Whenever the p-value is greater than alpha, we fail to reject the null hypothesis. In plain language, we do not have enough evidence to reject the claim that 80% of the people lose weight from the drug. The test was inconclusive. The t distribution. For our next type of test, we need to introduce the tree distribution. It looks a lot like the normal bell curve, but it used specifically for the population means specifically with the smaller or less certain sample data. Again, hypothesis testing. Here is another example. The Frito-Lay claims that an average bag of Lay's has 170 mg of sodium. A biochemist examines 60 bags and finds an average of 230 mg of sodium. With a standard deviation of 8 mg, is there enough evidence that Frito-Lay is underestimating their sodium content? Checking conditions, random check, independent. There are way more than 60 bags of Lay's in existence. So check large enough. Our sample size of 60 is at least 30. So check. Setting up hypothesis. Our null is that the true mean is 170 mg. Since the question asks about the understanding, our alternative is that true mean is greater than 170 mg. Alpha value is 0.05. On our calculator, test t-test plug in mu0 as 170, x bar as 230, and sample standard deviation is 8, n as 60, and select greater than mu0. This gives us a t-score of 58.09 and an incredibly small p-value of 4.48 times 10 to the negative 54. Interpreting. Our p-value is extremely smaller than alpha, so we reject the null hypothesis. We have overwhelming evidence that Frito-Lay's bag actually contains more sodium than they are claiming. 170 mg is an underestimate. So, our last type of test use the x-square distribution, which looks quite different. It is skewed to the right rather than symmetric. We use whenever we are comparing categorical data, not means or proportions. Again, let's use a genetic examples. Gregor Mendel predicted a 3 to 1 ratio of yellow to a green pie plants as research breeds 160 plants and observes 90 yellow and 70 green. Is there a significant difference between their observed results and Mendel's predicted ratio? Okay. First, we calculate our expected counts based on 3 to 1 ratio. Out of 160 plants, we would expect 120 yellow and the rest 40 green. Checking conditions, random check, independent. We can responsibly assume independent assortment of genes large enough. Both expected counts 120 and 40 are greater than 5, so check. For our hypothesis, since we are comparing distribution rather than a single parameter, we say that the null hypothesis is that the true proportions match Mendel's ratio 75% yellow, 25% green. The alternative is that at least one of these proportions is actually different. Alpha value is 0.05 and on calculator, enter your observed value in list 1 and expected values in list 2. Then go to the test x square GOF test with 1 degree of freedom, number of categories -1. This gives us a x squared value of 58.09. Wait, let me be precise. Working this by hand for yellow, 90 minus 120 squared divided by 120 equals 7.5. For green, 70 minus 40 is squared divided by 40 and equals to 22.5. Adding those together gives us an x square statics of 3 of 30. Comparing that to our critical value of 3.841 from the x square table or just trusting the calculators, p-value of 4.32 times 10 to the negative 8. Either way, our x squared value is far greater than the critical value and our p-value is far less than alpha value. So, we reject the null hypothesis. We have enough evidence to say that there is a significant difference between the researchers' observed results and the Mendel's predicted ratio. Now, hypothesis testing. Our final example uses a contingency table. Researchers test a new migraine drug on 47 randomly selected subjects, giving some the drugs and some a placebo. Of those who took a drug, 15 improved and 11 didn't. Of those on the placebo, 4 improved and 17 didn't. Is there enough evidence that the drug actually helps mitigate migraines? This time, since we are dealing with a table instead of a single list, we calculate expected counts using raw total times column total divided by grand total for each cell. Doing that gives us expected count of about 10.51, 8.49 and 15.49, 12.51. Check conditions, random check, independent check, large enough, all expected counts are greater than 5, so check. Since this is a test for independence, our hypotheses aren't written in equations. We simply say the null hypothesis is that the drug has no effect on migraines, and the alternative is that the drug does have an effect. On simple calculator, enter your observed data into matrix A as 2 by 2 matrix, then go to steps x squared test with a matrix A as observed as matrix B are expected. This gives us a x square value of 7.204 and pi value of 0.0073. By hand, the degree of freedom here is row minus 1 times column minus 1 v equals 1 gives us the same critical value of 3.841 as before. Our x square value is 7.204 is greater than the critical value and our p value is less than alpha. So once again we reject the null hypothesis. We have enough evidence to say that this drug does have a real effect on reducing migraines. Okay, so now what? With everything we have covered, you might be wondering, how do I know which tool to actually use for my own research? Here is a simple framework. First, figure out what kind of data you collected. It is quantitative or qualitative. Remember, even a rating scale counts as qualitative, not quantitative. Second, ask yourself before you are actually trying to access, are you looking for a relationship or correlation, which only applies to quantitative data? Or are you looking for some kind of significant difference between groups? Third, figure out which statistics is actually relevant. Are you comparing average or percentages between groups? Or are you looking for a slope you can use to predict future data points? Answering these three questions will point you directly to the right tool, whether that's a mean comparison or a proportion test, a square test, or a regression lines. So that's it. That's our session on data analysis. We covered measures of center and variability, how to visualize both qualitative and quantitative data regressions and correlations, and four different types of hypothesis tests. Thank you all so much for your time and attention. Good luck.